Hack and slash is a subgenre of action games that specializes in empowering the player through engaging combos, visceral feeling moves, and the ability to humiliate enemies in different ways. Platformers are a genre specializing in movement, how we glide from one side of the stage to another, doing sick tricks, avoiding hazards, and making the player look cool getting from point A to point B. The genres actually gel together pretty well, and even the problems they face can be similar as a result. Sometimes movement can be hard to execute, there's too many moves to remember, or maybe the game can be hard to understand for newcomers to either genre. Well, may I introduce Shinobi, Art of Vengeance. Shinobi, Art of Vengeance is an excellent example of trying to blend two genres together in a format that will appeal to fans of the genre while simultaneously serving as a good entry point for beginners that might have seen a clip or two of DMC and wanted to pull off their own cool combos without the knowledge to get there. Hack and slash games are relatively popular, with videos everyone has seen such as this DMC clip by Sunhill Legend and even making an appearance in popular franchises such as the Final Fantasy series through 16, Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance, and Nier Automata to name a few. Despite the gameplay style being relatively well known and well received, there is something to be said about execution. Some games take a beginner-friendly approach, prioritizing the ability to look cool by more players with easy button executions, putting the difficulty on either enemy mechanics or how exactly you string things together. Final Fantasy XVI and Nier would fall under this category in my opinion. Devil May Cry would approach the end of higher execution, timings, multiple weapons to juggle between with different uses for each, but what you get out of that experience is freedom in how you choose to style on your opponent. That's not to discredit 16 or Nier Automata, both allow you to pull off stylish maneuvers as well as with some stellar animations, but if you think about it alongside with the control schemes, they can be easier to wrap your head around. This disparity between cool and difficult is a tough thing to balance, and leads to people dropping otherwise enjoyable experiences. It's all too common to see this complaint from people that want to get into fighting games. I want to do cool combos and beat my opponents, but I don't want to practice like a 9 to 5. This same logic could be applied to hack and slash titles, as they aren't always the most intuitive when it comes to combos without proper experimentation. On the other side, we have the platforming elements that go hand in hand with most 2D games. Platforming is usually a fun activity that encourages a player to find fast ways to get from start to finish of a level. Running, jumping, climbing walls, or even bouncing off enemies, there are a plethora of ways when done right to make moving around a mission fun. Oftentimes accompanying these games though can be frustrating run enders, hazards, or screen crunch preventing you from anticipating things as you approach, leading to unnecessary damage that can leave players feeling as if their time is being wasted. And if you feel like this video isn't a waste of your time, consider subscribing. Thank you for tuning in, enjoy the rest of the video. Suffice to say, each genre has their good, their bad, and I'm happy to say Shinobi tackles both issues relatively well. But I'm getting ahead of myself, so let's start from the beginning. Shinobi, Art of Vengeance is an action platformer, specifically of the hack and slash variety. Your goal is to take on Lord Ruse and defeat him, the big bad of this game. To get to him, first Joe Musashi is tasked with defeating and taking down key figures in the E&E Corps army and bases of operations. We'll be running, jumping, and slashing through waves of enemies as we traverse each level. This game starts off pretty simple, so it's easy to pick up, but adding some depth to a few moves you do have. At the beginning, you can throw kunai, use 2 sets of sword combos, light and heavy. Light attacks deal more damage, but heavy fills up the execution gauge. That bar essentially serves as this game's version of an instant takedown in the Arkham games, and once it's full, you'll see a red symbol appear behind your foes. This allows Joe to execute his targets, with the more you execute in one go, giving you more rewards such as money, health, and kunai. The combos are genius as you can mix and match certain moves together over being locked into 2 static combo strings, with the moves changing if performed in the air or on the ground, and the order in which the buttons are pressed. For example, you can do 2 lights into 2 heavies for some damage into finishers that will help fill the execution gauge, or you can go straight into the 2 heavies from the ground with no buildup. Depending on the enemy type, this is fine as the wind-up period isn't too tedious, but by starting with the light, you can guarantee those next 2 hits. If they don't die first, that is. For a lot of foes early on, that's more than enough to deal with them. But what the game doesn't teach you, and instead leaves into the player's hands to figure out, that the player is in control of Joe's actions. Duh. But what I mean is that you can weave different strings together. Maybe I want to do 2 light swings into a kunai, then attack from the air. You can do that. Maybe I'd like to start with a heavy, dash in, do some lights, and finish them off with a kunai. You can do that. Maybe I want to embarrass this one foe in particular, so I play hot potato with their body, seeing how much I can juggle this particular enemy before they drop to the ground and that combo ends. That's there for you too. Taking cues from games like Devil May Cry, it's a refreshing thing to find in a 2D platformer as it's so different to most entries. Mega Man Zero, my favorite series of platformers, has its own combo system available that revolves around hit priority, with some moves sending foes into hit stun faster than others, meaning that combos are much more tightly knit, only allowing for the use of certain moves one after the other. It's fun in its own right, as you can net a lot of damage in one go. Seeing that health bar pop is a different feeling. But in Shinobi at least, what I feel isn't necessarily tied to that health bar. What I feel instead is what many would consider the rule of cool. If there's something I want to string together, try to do, or test out new moves and freestyle combinations, I can do that off the top of my head. It's the equivalent to making up songs or rap as you go, and that freedom is refreshing in a title like this. Shinobi teeters closer to what 16 and Nier are in terms of its execution, but has more than enough tools to allow the player to decide what it is specifically they want to use while destroying their enemies. The game manages to stay engaging through the use of different enemy types, new tools, and the ability to use these tools in various ways, primarily dealing damage, but whether something serves as a combo finisher, starter, extender is up to you, allowing for newcomers to find flexibility without spending oodles of time into this entry to satisfy their need to pull off something flashy. The moves are satisfying, animations, sound effects are superb, but before you can even think about settling into a monotonous routine, the game constantly throws new tools at the player to experiment with, whether this is in the form of abilities, passive effects, active abilities, or the supers. There are many tools in this game to keep you preoccupied for what is around a 10-hour adventure, and never once did I feel the game get stale even when revisiting levels to 100% them or doing the boss rush mode. Credit where credit is due, and if I could kiss the brain of the developers that made this game, I would. The game manages to not only be freeing, but take the best parts of different games in the genre for this adventure. The simplicity of combo execution in something like FF16 allows many to feel cool while retaining the combo breath from DMC, such as being able to juggle foes for a long while. And yes, this applies to bosses, which, while I haven't made my video on 16 quite yet, was one of my biggest letdowns to me personally. To add on to this, in 16, there's a stagger meter, and when broken, bosses stand still, allowing the player to go combo mad on them. But the problem is, it's not entirely centered around the rule of cool for a few different reasons, and the biggest being that bosses can't be dispositioned by Clive, meaning that you won't be sending bosses high in the skies, humiliating them with unique combo strings you find through your playthrough, and can hurt the game's replayability in my eyes slightly. Shinobi doesn't do this. You can interrupt bosses from executing patterns and continuing their onslaught, opening them up to your turn in the blender. It works so well, and every time I got new moves, I would think of ways I could extend a combo further on a boss. Eventually these do end as to not make the bosses a pushover, but it's an amazing way to put the power into the player's hands and empower them, really driving home what hack and slash titles are all about in my eyes. I cannot sing the praises of the combat enough. This isn't even touching on the combo counter, which is a nice touch, allowing players to add on to their playstyle through maintaining a certain counter all stage. The counter can activate the effects of some medallions, such as giving Joe's attacks more damage once your counter is at 15 or higher. This adds some stakes to getting hit and forces the player to pay attention to maintain their most powerful state. The nice part? The counter isn't time gated. There is no ticking meter and it fades. Just don't get hit and you can have your effects on all level. The game systems are just smart and work together so well to gel into an addicting gameplay loop that I'd recommend to any fan of platformers, as I could to those who may only like action games and never tried a 2D title before. The gameplay is definitely the highest selling point of this title, but that's not to knock the other areas such as the story. I wouldn't say the story is anything crazy, but it gets the job done while being a decent follow. You play as Joe Musashi on his way for another day of training students at the Oboro clan in their ways of combat until he and his student Tomoe are stopped by a rogue ninja from E&E Corps, a corporation under the control of Lord Ruse. Lord Ruse is the game's central antagonist, a tyrant that rose to power by stealing the death scythe of the Grim Reaper or Anko and use it to amass a ton of power, taking over the world little by little. After attacking and destroying the Oboro clan's dojo, Lord Ruse taunts Joe Musashi, attempting to kill him through the use of a minion at the start of the game and failing. Over the course of the journey, Joe travels to faraway lands dealing with foes of many different types: humans, brains, little goblin thingies, and more on his way to stop Lord Ruse. The story itself, as I said earlier, is serviceable. I enjoyed it, but it's definitely not something I was in love with necessarily. The characters weren't annoying, nobody overstayed their welcome, and arguably could have done with some more screen time to develop into real characters. Now, I'm no Shinobi veteran, and for those jumping into this title, there are previous games before it. Whether they're linked or not, I'm unsure, aside from the name, but I had no problem following along from start to finish, making this an excellent point to dive into the series. Joe himself is a silent protagonist, which doesn't lend to much in the way of characterization, aside from grunts, but as a Link fan, what do I know? Skyward Sword was super expressive, and he doesn't talk once. There are some twists and storytelling done through the backgrounds of the maps, aside from just through the dialogue itself. It's fun, exciting, and there are actually a few good high points towards the end that serve into some fun payoff for those following along. If you don't care and would like to just play the game, no worries, there's a skip button for you as well. The story to me is good for a platformer. There is exposition and a reason for why things are happening, but it never takes you out of the action too long, which is something I'm sure most platforming fans will appreciate, as the highlight is the gameplay in many regards. The art style, while I'm no artistic expert, has great variety, not just in setting but the color palettes used to describe each one. From the snowy mountains near the Oboro clan's dojo, to the flashing lights of a neon city, to the red skies of a warring battlefield, the game manages to take you to many different areas, all depicted with beautiful backdrops that contain movement, making them dynamic to each level. Did I mention you even get to go into the belly of a beast? These levels themselves don't borrow too much from each other in terms of flooring and areas, giving Joe's adventure a freshness as you go through each zone up until the end, where different segments are combined into one for a nice mix-up of what we already know. This and the gameplay are supported by a soundtrack that doesn't manage to overpower the gameplay. I wouldn't call it low-key or bad by any means, but rather flows nicely woven into the action without taking away from what you're doing. I pleasantly enjoyed the boss themes alongside a few stages and never felt like something stuck out like a sore thumb or was bad. Aside from the gameplay, story, and presentation, I'd argue something that I was pleasantly surprised with was the quality of life in this title. I played Shinobi on Steam. Thanks to this, I was able to use my GameCube controller through the means of Steam input and ran into no issues while attempting to play this entry. While true for this, there have been times through Steam that despite Steam input, I will find myself having issues such as a controller constantly disconnecting, or the game runs worse as it is having trouble reading the controller at times. This is more so common in older titles, but I'm happy to say nothing like that ever happened with Shinobi. There are plenty of settings for resolution, frame rate, sound settings, and overall performance that was smooth. I never had an issue running the game at 120 FPS on my 3080 Ti with a Ryzen 5 5600X as my processor, from start to finish. The only bugs I encountered were extremely minor, such as accidentally clipping outside a boss room and being unable to enter, and when platforming, but it only happened twice in my entire playthrough, that they don't feel worth complaining over aside from a small mention. As for quality of life, swapping from keyboard to controller was seamless without having to restart the game, and I could plug in midway if needed with button prompt swapping as seamlessly as I press keys. On the gameplay side of things, platformers are notorious for obnoxious traps to have players end their run or lose a life, such as insta-kill spikes, pitfalls, or some older titles such as the Zero game suffering from screen crunch, where things off screen find a way to hit you even though you weren't near them. This isn't a problem at all in Shinobi though. When engaging with heavy platforming segments, if you run into a spike, Joe will get hurt and sent back to your last checkpoint of the platforming segment with some damage done to the health bar, but never starting you over or forcing a player to repeat things for a while before getting them. You heard me right too, as I said checkpoints in between platforming segments. This isn't true for all of them, but when unlocking secret items, there are times where you can unlock a checkpoint that will set you back to a particular tough point and keep attempting from there over the entire course. This isn't true for all of them though, with the second to last level having a relatively tough segment that I had to rerun more than 10 times to get through, but never did I feel that set of frustration with the game due to faulty controls or questionable design. It just took me learning to adapt and the timings to get through them, and that was a feeling I enjoyed. The game manages to incorporate these less punishing mechanics into combat scenarios too, making it so that if you fall off the stage during a combat encounter, you just take some damage but can continue the fight. This isn't true about all gaps though, especially during platforming segments where it's you versus the clock, or for the Anko rifts, a side objective awarding Joe with a stronger katana upon completion of all of them. For these, you do have to start over from the beginning of the course as it's for a specific reward. This never bothered me personally, but to each their own, do with that information what you will. I do think the challenges are fair, and some of the later levels for the Anko rifts can be tough They feel like more of an endurance test than anything, but by that point you should have learned how to work with the game's systems to get to your goal. And I think it pays off very well personally. The combat manages to stay fresh by throwing many different enemy types at you, but none are ever overtly annoying with weird patterns or an attack that wasn't telegraphed properly if you're getting hit in this entry. It's usually due to your own faults, and it is highly appreciated as each enemy is unique, with different attacks to learn, and the game never overwhelming you with enemy bloat during tough segments, making the game always feel fair when I felt surrounded during the optional Elite Squad events. These definitely didn't pull their punches though, and I enjoyed each one as I came across them. There is a lot to love, and a lot I did with Shinobi Art of Vengeance, feeling like a crossover between many games I enjoy such as Mega Man, Final Fantasy 16, without the things I didn't like, keeping the gameplay fun, engaging, and a solid $30 to spend. I'd recommend Shinobi to newcomers or veterans to either hack and slash or platformers alike. This entry has a lot to enjoy, and I think you can't go wrong with picking up Shinobi to seeing if it's your cup of tea. With that said, I hope you enjoyed my critique of Shinobi Art of Vengeance, and stick around for more if you liked what you heard or my video style. Please consider subscribing. Stay safe, and thank you for your time, Musashi.